Good afternoon. My name is Ingrid Mason, and I am the co-convener of the AI4LAM regional chapter for Australia and Aotearoa, New Zealand. And today we are here to listen in and interact around AI. So the title of today's talk is Beyond the Chatbot, What is AI? So I'd like to welcome everyone to this webinar hosted by Caval and AI4LAM. While I'm sure you're all familiar with Caval, you may not be familiar with AI4LAM. AI4LAM is short for Artificial Intelligence, Libraries, Archives and Museums. And this is an international participatory community focused on advancing the use of artificial intelligence in, for and by libraries, archives and museums. On behalf of Caval and the CRIG committee and AI4LAM, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the unceded lands across Australia and Aotearoa, New Zealand, where we live, learn and work. We acknowledge and celebrate the inherent strength of Aboriginal, Torres Strait Islander and other First Nations peoples and communities, and recognise their continuing connection to land, waters, sky and culture. We pay our respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and I would like to welcome and extend my respects to First Nations peoples attending this webinar today. Today, I'm joining you from Gnana country, and I encourage you to share which country you are attending from in the chat. So today's webinar is all about artificial intelligence, AI for short, and machine learning, ML for short. And we will explore how library staff can use these new technologies in their work. We're joined today by Dr. Gnana Bharathy, and he serves as the Australian Research Data Commons National Expert in AI, ML, for Australian research and educational institutions. And he also works as a researcher at UTS, the University of Sydney. So Gnana will take us through the evolution of AI and ML, explaining what it is, and we'll explore a few of the current challenges. After the presentation, there'll be time for you to ask questions via Slido. The Slido link for this webinar has been added to the chat. Alternatively, you can go to slido.com or the Slido app and use the event code #752994. And in Slido, you can also vote on the questions that others put in there to move them further up the list. After the Q&A, the webinar will continue with a collaborative activity that Gnana will lead with the entire group. And if you have any technical questions during the session, please just type them into the chat and the Caval team will assist you. But for now, let's get into the presentation by welcoming Gnana to start speaking. Welcome, Gnana.
Thank you, Ingrid, and thank you, everyone. Firstly, let me acknowledge the First Nations people of both Australia and New Zealand, as well as other lands as well, Kia ora. And I am speaking from the Darug land. And so we acknowledge and celebrate the first Australians on whose traditional lands we meet, and we pay respect to their elders, past, present, and emerging. Thank you. And I also want to acknowledge and introduce my collaborator, who I did not have a chance to introduce because this collaboration started much later. That is soon to be Dr. Muhammad Ali, also from ARDC. And he's also an AI ML researcher and AI ML and data specialist at ARDC as well. And like his namesake, I'm sure he will go on to create history. And so let's start the session now. And let me share the screen. So in this talk, what AI in the realm of the library. So we will first look at why, what, and how of the AI, and then look at how it could help librarians and how librarians could help the AI researchers. And in this slide that you may have seen before, that artificial intelligence. So in this slide, we quickly introduce what artificial intelligence is. That it's a technique that enables systems to perform human-like tasks, or the task that requires at least some level of human intelligence. And the subset of AI includes many things, including the modern day technique, which is the machine learning, which is about learning from the data itself. And it's worth acknowledging that in the previous generation of AI, it's a learning was happening through eliciting the expert knowledge. And then there are even more specialized areas of artificial intelligence, which is deep learning, which is akin to creating a neural net that actually consumes large amounts of data and learns from that. And the history of AI goes back many years. And but the whole process of learning from somehow from data, whether small or large or even a minuscule, has been a human endeavor for many, many years. Humans have always endeavored to predict the future for a long, long time. And it's only recently that we have been able to systematically organize the data or sufficient data and learn from that evidence. But the whole process of AI is about raising this data or the evidence to some wisdom, some organized information, and then maybe some nuggets of knowledge, and possibly or hopefully to wisdom that would actually serve to make the right decisions or help make the decisions themselves. The history of AI itself is, as I said, fairly long. It's been there since the World War II, and many attempts have been made. It is also a checkered history, driven by ups and downs in the funding process. It has seen 2 winters. So with the initial expectation, peak in the expectation, followed by a trough in disillusionment, it had followed. But nonetheless, the AI has also been depicted in the popular science or in the science, in the popular entertainment sphere as well, with super intelligent abilities. That has not stopped. It has not stopped the process of AI depiction either. No, winter or summer, it has always gone on. So you can see there are a number of movies and books that have been made to depict AI in various capacity, both evil and good. But over time, the fiction and the real and the real have been converging. What has been happening or has been described as a fiction is slowly coming true. And so, as I mentioned, the previous generation of AI was about eliciting human expertise. And the new one is about relying entirely on data. Neither of that is perfect, but nonetheless, they have their place. But so what is AI? So AI actually brings data through a number of tools and infrastructure, certain methods and frameworks, as well as, and most importantly, note this, an integrative mindset to actually perform tasks such as prediction, prescription, diagnostics, or description, and so on. From data of various types. The data can be numeric data, it could be text, it can be images, and so on and on. And the process of AI itself, how is this data being converted to wisdom, is itself goes through this data science process, wherein the first part is about formulating the problem, and then acquiring and preparing and exploring this data to understand what is in the data, and then preparing the models, including for selecting the variables and so on. And also important in this case is also testing this model with unseen data. So you need to also separate some data and test it against that data that has not hitherto not been seen by the model. And then once it goes through that, you may end up with a proof of concept. And the whole process is cyclic in nature. And the proof of concept it may go through further cycles to improve sufficiently. And at certain stage, it gets deployed into production, meaning it becomes a functioning AI. And so even then, it's the whole process has to be maintained. The cyclic nature is quite important. But from your perspective, I would like you to also look at the two upfront sides of AI, which is a problem formulation, as well as data pre-processing, which would be quite relevant to the librarians in particularly. And so some intuitions, of course. Many different names have been given to AI, many different aspirations have been cast, and so as well as aspersions. And so people talk about AI in different contexts, depending on what it could do. For example, narrow intelligence, general intelligence, super intelligence. Of course, once you get to the general or the super, it's still an aspirational thing. But we have been successful in developing narrow intelligence for very specific tasks. Similarly, there has been the reactive machines, which actually just responds to, as well as limited memory. These have been around and have been successful. But theory of mind and the self-awareness are actually still aspirational as well. But theory of mind has been quite widely employed in areas such as ABM and so on, agent-based models, etc. So what is the logic that's run behind this AI, at least the modern AI? It is all about separating the data to see some patterns. So understanding what patterns are there, depending on the type of data, that some patterns are learned from bottom up, from ground up. So you are not specifying what patterns to look for, but rather it is actually seeing the patterns in the data. So in this case, for example, good customers from bad customers could be separated, for example, from the frequency of their interactions and the transactional values. Of course, this is a very neatly separated, specialized case. In reality, it can be a bit more complicated. The case very close to AI that you are all familiar with is a regression model. Look at the example wherein, for example, you are predicting the sales revenue based on the advertising expenditure. And in a textbook case of high school statistics or mathematics, you would actually draw a line through this and then fit a curve. And this could also be done mathematically and fit a line wherein you are essentially minimizing the error in actually drawing that line. This is an underlying principle in AI as well. So somehow you are able to separate one set of data from another or fit into certain patterns. So taking this concept further, of course, the models can be more complex, the patterns can be more complex, it can be many, many dimensions, and so on. So that is where actually the techniques gets much more complex, but that detail itself is not necessary in this case. Say, for example, unlike the one I showed earlier, this could be about a pattern as something like this, not just with two attributes, but many, many attributes. So in a multi-dimensional space, for example. So how do you separate that? So in this case, for example, this is a simple model, a machine learning model that actually, based on the characteristics of the petals, and it is able to separate three different types of flowers, and Setosa, versicolor, and Virginia. And so based on the images and the characteristics, these can be separated. So one of the key criteria in the case of in separating them is in a way it is the degree of disorder in the data. So the way it separates, it minimizes that heterogeneity in any one group, and thereby it predicts. So in this case, a Gini index has been used. That is, that's a way of describing how heterogeneous the data is. So when the model separates this into a tree, it makes sure that each group or class has a minimal heterogeneity in the data. Muhammad, do you want to add anything?
No, that's fine. So basically, these diagrams actually gives us that how actually AI is making decisions based on the given data. So we put this slide to demonstrate that what kind of inputs or input data we have and what kind of output that AI can help in terms of libraries also. Because we have already demonstrated these examples for flowers. The similar case could be used for the, let's say, for books and different kind of images within the library. Let's say we have a number of data, we can say big data we have in library. And if you want to classify those images or the different contents in the images, we can use similar kind of concept to classify those images. So this is one of the very practical example that we try to demonstrate in this slide, I think. There are more things, I think, which you can explain later on these slides.
Sure. And then there are other models. So the model that was shown previously is called decision tree model. It splits the data through a tree-like algorithm. And another type of model is called a deep learning model, which actually kind of mimics some of the processes or patterns in the human human brain or nervous system, at least in the overall structure. And so what it does is it has a number of nodes that can be built like a neural network, and it learns from the data what should be the weights for each of these, and thereby it can replicate this pattern. So it learns from some data, and then it's able to actually predict for data wherein where there is no learning data or the target information. So so when you give an example with the correctly marked output, it learns from that, and then even when it has an example without the correctly marked output, it's able to predict that, which can be tested using unseen data. So for example, a cat, an image of the cat, or when various animals are fed, and some cats are among them that are marked, eventually the network will learn to understand how a cat would look like in its all forms of variations, and then being able to actually predict that even without that information. And so there are a number of different types of AIs, and we wouldn't go into this detail, except I would point out that natural language processing or the text processing part of the AI would be quite important for the library, in the library context. So it is able to extract text from large volumes of text. AI can summarize text and translate it, classify text, and so on, all by learning some patterns from the training data, and is able to bring forth to actually to unseen data and so on. So that is one application. And another one, of course, speech to text, as well as vision and image recognition, which we just showed how it can separate the flowers, which is equally applied to detecting diseases, to actually even converting text or OCR text into actual text. So it's recognizing text or alphabets in digitization and so on. And so the number of such applications exist that are particularly useful for library sciences. And there are many other areas that are less relevant, but vision, speech, and speech is also quite important. It can convert text to speech and also speech to text as well. And so these are some of the things that are of interest as well. And so the next one is just to add to the intuition. There is actually so playground.tensorflow.org that you can actually go there, and this is a neural network based playground where you could actually tweak these various parameters and then see how it is able to separate these different data using this using this. So that's it's a simple classification algorithm, but it's able to separate that. In a similar principles could be applied in maybe, for example, classifying text, one type of text from another, one type of meaning from another, and so on. And so what matters to you in this AI is not actually the algorithms or the techniques. There are a vast variety of applications and a vast variety of algorithms. But the AI process of AI itself, it starts with the diagnostics or the problem formulation. And it ends with some value or an impact. But in between this are a chain of processes or life cycle processes that are involved. Firstly, that the problem must be formulated, of course. And that by itself is actually a life cycle process, meaning you could potentially employ design thinking process to interact with the stakeholders and formulate the problem, which is highly recommended. And then, of course, you actually have to gather and prepare this data, which goes through the data lifecycle management itself. And then, of course, modeling or the data science process that I mentioned. And then the deployment, which is more of a technology process. So it's a chain of with fragile links between these three or a number of these life cycle processes or the loops. Many things could break it. So that is something that serial dependency could actually be severed by risk, ethical issues, explanation, trust, the translational issues, adoption, and so on. So being able to participate in the whole process is important, and the librarians have a very important role to play in this. And particularly when you look at the data governance, for example, that's an area that is quite relevant to the librarians, and data management as well as governance is an area that librarians would particularly contribute as well. And so So the life cycle of data itself is very well known to you. You also come into picture in number of these areas. You touch, you actually could help generate some of the data or find some of the data, acquire and verify, and data assurance processes or custodianships in the data, and the retrieval, which is at the core of librarianship, and dissemination. And the usage, of course, is modeling, but there is dissemination and including the publication process. And so the number of these life cycle areas, there is very close relevance to the librarians, and you are already playing a role, even if you hadn't explicitly thought about it. So in the whole life cycle, you will see the data gathering as quite an important part for the librarians, but also asking the question, the problem formulation. Sometimes it can start with ideally the question, sometimes with actually the data itself. But eventually it has to go through multiple cycles. And again, the problem needs to be refined, and then the whole thing, whole life cycle need to be completed. And so in this context, how and where could data or the AI and the library interact? So one certainly needs to look at what traditional libraries have been versus how they are emerging. Of course, the traditional libraries, or at least in my childhood, what I knew of libraries are about quiet place for reading, and maybe some curation of materials, and librarians as curators and gatekeepers of this material. But today, what I see is an entirely different world. It is what is emerging is a delocalized access to materials or resources, and information often seen as an interactive process and conversation, sometimes interaction with Google search or other search engines, as well as maybe your peers and colleagues and so on. And you are also both producers and the consumers of the library, especially as researchers. You are producing materials and you are consuming. And there has been disintermediation in the traditional sense, not just in the library, but every field today. But at the same time, the culture of participation has improved. Overall technical skills have gone up. But from days of information scarcity to we are in a time of information abundance. But at the same time, we have time scarcity as well. So we are kind of drowning in information with little time to organize. That goes for everyone. So some of the, text or scholarly works in this area talk about librarians' new role as epomediation and mediating a federated network of information pathways and generating, but facilitating the users to actually go through the information, generate their own information. And at the same time, librarians also manage many of the high-tech tools and outputs, including web portals, learning products, and they are at the forefront of data management. And so they play a key role in information management, including in the metadata area. So how could librarians help in this? Mohammed will give a brief intro in this.
Gnana, if I may interrupt, I think we do need to skip the questions because we've got a hard stop at I think 2:15.
Sure.
So there are some questions in the Slido board
Sure.
for you, but if you can flip over to the exercise, that would be terrific, so that we can get a bit of interaction happening.
Sure.
Thank you.
Sure. Yeah, if you, Mohammed, if you want to quickly look at this, where is questions, please?
I'm pasting that link, Gnana.
Okay.
And so this is the link, and we have to enter the code which has been shared previously.
Yeah.
And I'm pasting the code again, I think, here.
Yeah, so the question at the very top of the Slido link, which I think is probably the most powerful, is if a librarian has an idea for an AI to benefit their workplace, is there a way that that librarian can go about making that idea a reality? People are keen to take all that understanding and that technology that you've just been describing. How can they go from, wow, that's terrific technology, to where can I start working with it? That seems to be a pretty good one to start with.
Sure. I think certainly, I mean, one area they are already working is in data management, and also making it so if in the case of research librarians, for example, many of them themselves are researchers, but they also assess the research process. So they could actually employ these tools to help the researchers in the, especially, so we are coming to that pretty quickly. And so in so how do you actually make it a reality? So it's of course there are a number of tools available. So as a librarian, you don't have to build an AI. There are AI tools and that you can consume and make it available, but also you can participate in the AI process itself. So if that's a maybe in the interest of time, I will answer one more question. Yes, AI does have bias. So this is again something we are coming to. That is one of the roles that librarians would be playing in this is to be part of this data stewardship and the custodianship committees. That so there's need to have that. We need to have the diversity in the stakeholders when we are actually developing AI. So that is part of reducing this bias in the AI.
That's quite interesting though, because I guess what you're indicating there is that to really leverage AI, we need to have people from not only different backgrounds with different perspectives, but we also need people with different skill sets.
Correct.
And expertise, because some of us might be, curators of data, some of us might be more comfortable in the computational area, and some of us might not be comfortable with either of that. It might be in the ethics department, but you're signaling there that we actually need to have quite a framework of expertise brought together. Yeah,
absolutely. Both the humanistic as well as the computational sides need to come together. So so these are some case studies that Mohammed, do you want to give a 1-minute intro?
Yeah, so we actually added these case studies based on some of the outcomes from the Springer publisher. Actually, they have published their survey results recently on February 2022, and their title was "How AI Can Assist Librarians to Meet the Future Needs." So there are a couple of case studies that we have included, and the first one is like how AI can help to automate the things, such as how we can generate automatic table of contents. For example, if we have different databases and a list of contents from the different books, how we can design intelligent clustering algorithms so that they can automatically make those decisions based on the clustering algorithm. So this is one of the snapshots that they have shared, and how they are filtering those library data sets and databases to make their decisions actually. And this is the second case study. This shows actually that how AI can help to in the terms of books translation, because I think using the NLP, and there are different other algorithms, the books can be translated from one language to other to remove the barriers of the language among the researchers. And the third one was like, there is a concept of virtual reality. The VR and AI is like combining different terminologies to give the 3D view of the things actually. For example, the book that is on the screen has some kind of AR training materials which they want to convey to the readers, and AI is one of the examples that it can help to go into more details that what could be the 3D of this topic, or how the authors try to explain this 3D reality actually in these case studies. And these are some of the other things that we have combined. For example, one of the practical things is like chatbots, which we usually see in the websites, like to answer the questions of the customers, even in the offline working hours. And the other is definitely the document matching and the translation of book services that we have previously mentioned.
It's also interesting how could AI help. Some of these are about improving efficiency and effectiveness, but some are about providing the experience, including for personalization, but as well as providing assistance for special needs. So embracing these different range of technologies, including AR, VR, etc., has already been happening in many spaces. And in number of departments or areas in library are amenable to or conducive to this, and including reference, virtual services, cataloging, etc., are amenable to AI. So I'll leave that for you to read. And I mean, number of overall efficiencies have been highlighted, efficiencies as well as effectiveness, including say time, space, and effort, and experience, and so on. But the downsides of AI, as you know, it has come up a number of times here in the questions, is about biases. And and also it can magnify the biases that already exist in the data. And it could also magnify the biases in the accessibility to the technology between haves and the have-nots. And so librarians should actually consider playing a role in reducing these biases in some way or other. And as they have always played a front and central role in the distribution of public goods for many eras, probably from the times of Alexandria. But having said that, of course, it is there is risk of hacking, and erosion of knowledge could also happen even among. But it is a transformative space that one probably needs to embrace than fight. But so in terms of biases, this is where I was coming to, how could librarians actually help AI itself? Of course, AI is all about generalizing from the data, but humans have the capacity to, would actually go from intuition, which is even smaller data sets, which can be quite prone to bias as well. But at the same time, by bringing the whole human experience, through a participatory process as stakeholders, librarians also have a role to play in controlling the biases by identifying and raising it at the at the appropriate stages. And especially among, they could provide advice with ethics applications. Of course, they already provide data help with data management plans and so on. But providing access to data set, but also questioning the data sets for the research, AI researchers could be another area that could actually be in the realm of librarians.
So Gnana, do you think that, well, the library community is, as you say, accustomed to working with information with very different viewpoints, also working at the intersection of all the domains in a university environment. So I think you make a really interesting point about perhaps playing both a facilitative role in terms of navigating some of these ethical questions, but also thinking about the bias and how to actually interfere or intervene in that bias in some ways. So there are non-technical, if you might like, ways for library professionals to become more active and engaged, if I can kind of synthesize what you're saying. And I think it's very interesting that there are, in the academic library community, there are real challenges to some of the traditions that we've become accustomed to. So one of the questions in the Slido was about the fact that text generation may actually become part of one of your tools to study with. And so we all, not just librarians, are going to get a workout, I guess, and how these new technologies are going to disrupt this idea of what is an original work or plagiarism, that kind of thing. And I guess I wondered whether you have seen in your research projects that bring those two worlds together, the world of computer science and the world of humanities, for example, or social science, if you've seen examples of that in your own research.
Absolutely. It is, I think my area of research is largely around modeling, simulation, and AI of social systems. Yes, so have come across some of these issues. And one of the ways we have been able to tackle this space has been through hyper-participation of various stakeholders, because we don't know all the answers. We always rely on the domain expert, but not just the experts. It's also, in many cases, even the lay people, to put it in quotes. And so everyone has a point of view to bring to table in this. So that is why I don't entirely advocate that data-driven AI, because when we do that, we are throwing the baby with the bathwater. So the hybrid of both human knowledge and the AI needs to be taken into account in developing this AI. That human knowledge should actually be rounded up from multiple sources of expertise.
So you could say, you could say that the computation is a stakeholder and a much bigger stakeholder network, because I think people sort of do imagine technology like a tool. I'm indicating like a hammer, that you apply a hammer, but really I think what you're saying is that there is a set of interactions between the data and the technology and the people.
We should see it as a conversation than as a tool to a particular endpoint, until at least we go sufficiently through the cyclic process. So it is not a linear process as many would imagine, and definitely not jump with the data and just finish it. And so it is, you may start there, but the whole process is very cyclic. That's the reason I was emphasizing the cyclic nature of that. And it's also not just of a single cycle, but rather interacting cycles, a number of cycles. So where they interact, that interface matters a lot. And when two different cycles, say for example, data management life cycle and the modeling life cycles interact, there is a lot of handoff, that interface has a lot to offer, but it also poses number of risks. And so it is only through a participatory modeling approach that we would actually be able to tackle this process. At the center of AI development is our data scientists who orchestrate the process end to end. But they definitely need to hyper consult or rather participate with other professionals.
Yeah, hyper consulting, quite interesting. I must admit, I think
I take back that consult word. Yes, participate.
Yeah, but I think it's interesting because we often think of technology as something that you download and you get it and you start using it. But really, many of us in the collecting world are quite familiar with that idea of constant attention to a collection and constant attention to the people who are using your collection and their needs. So I think there's a nice theme and thread that you're pulling through there, Gnana and Mohammed, about that need for iteration and checking and testing. So there's kind of also an exploratory element to that, which is a little bit different, but I think we're going to have to put a pin in it today. And I have to call time and hand off to Sarah Germain. But thank you. That was terrific.
Before I close off, there is a Jamboard with room for you to contribute as to where do you think that you could participate. The link for the Jamboard is given here, and please put your question, and I will try to address your questions that you have asked here in by text, and so that it's a bit limited time for us to address each question right away, but we will both address these questions as well. So.
Wonderful, thank you, Gnana. As we're nearing the end of this webinar, I would like to wrap up by thanking Gnana and Mohammed for their presentation and Ingrid for her wonderful facilitation. I'm sure we're keen to learn even more about how we can use AI and ML, and I'm sure that we'll be contributing to the Jamboard for sure. I would also like to thank AI4LAM and CRIG for agreeing to collaborate on this webinar, and I'm sure that we'll be collaborating more in the future. If you have any questions following this webinar, you can send an email to members@caval.edu.au and we will forward them to Gnana and Mohammed or Ingrid as well. I also want to mention that CAVAL and AI4LAM have arranged for native trees to be planted through the organisation 15 Trees as a thank you to Gnana, Mohammed and Ingrid. Finally, we'd hope to see you at the future CAVAL and AI4LAM events. Thank you, everyone.